Imagine this. A shopper stands in the frozen aisle at Walmart. The glass doors shine with bright colors, pizzas, stacked high burgers, and neat rose berries that promise fresh-picked sweetness even in the middle of winter. The choices feel endless. The prices look unbeatable. It feels safe, even comforting, to fill the cart here. But hidden behind those boxes is a troubling history. A pizza once pulled for deadly bacteria, meat patties recalled after inspectors found chunks of wood inside, bags of frozen fruit tied to hepatitis outbreaks that sent families to the hospital. These aren't rumors. They are recalls and investigations connected to products in this very aisle. Most of us shop here. Most of us trust these shelves. But trust can be dangerous. Behind the tempting packaging, real risks wait for anyone who brings them home. Still, not every frozen food at Walmart is a gamble. That's why we're here. In this video, we reveal 5 you should never touch and 2 that may truly be safe. Number 1. Frozen patties. Few foods feel as American as a burger on the grill. The sound of sizzling beef, the smell of smoke, and a plate stacked with buns waiting on the picnic table. Frozen patties make that picture simple, no mess, no fuss, just open the box and drop them on the fire. For families on a budget, they look like the perfect shortcut to tradition, but looks can deceive. Walmart's own Sam's Choice frozen beef patties were once recalled after inspectors discovered something shocking. Buried inside the meat were fragments of wood, not a spice, not a harmless mistake on a label. Actual splinters hidden in food meant for family tables. Nearly 90,000 pounds had to be pulled from Walmart shelves across the country. And that was not an isolated event. Federal inspectors have flagged frozen patties again and again over the years. Hard plastic, rubber, and even sharp bits of metal have turned up in boxes sold under big names. In one more recent case, beef tied to Walmart's supply chain tested positive for E. coli, a bacteria that can trigger kidney failure in children and send older adults straight to intensive care. These are not distant scares buried in history. They are part of a pattern that keeps returning. Now try to think as a random customer. You shop late after work, trying to stretch the grocery budget. The frozen patties seem like an easy win enough to feed the whole family, easy to store, and cheap compared to fresh meat. You toss them in the cart without thinking twice. Days later, the cookout begins. The grandkids run around the yard. Plates are stacked with ketchup and cheese. Then the moment no one expects. A child bites into something sharp. A grandparent feels a crack in a tooth. Or someone swallows a piece of plastic too small to notice until the choking starts. And if the danger is not foreign objects, it could be bacteria. Ground beef is especially risky because it mixes meat from many animals. One tainted cut can contaminate thousands of patties. Cooking can help, but even a slightly undercooked burger can be enough to carry E. coli or salmonella straight into the body. For a healthy teenager, it might mean days of discomfort. For an older adult, it can mean weeks in the hospital dialysis machines or a fight for life itself. The emotional toll lingers long after the meal ends. Families who trusted a box on a store shelf are left blaming themselves. Parents replay every choice, wondering if they should have paid more for fresh meat. Seniors who believe frozen food was safe and easy suddenly feel betrayed by the very store they relied on for decades. Of course, not every frozen patty ends in disaster. Millions are sold every year without incident. But the record of recalls tells its own story. When Walmart's own private labels have already landed on the government's list, trust becomes a gamble. One mistake at a massive processing plant can send contaminated food to hundreds of stores across dozens of states. By the time the recall notice reaches the news, the boxes are already sitting in freezers across the country. That is why frozen patties may be one of the most unpredictable buys in Walmart's freezer. They look like convenience, but in reality they carry risks that no family expects. Even a food meant to bring people together around the grill can turn into a hidden hazard. And burgers are only the beginning, because right next to them another family favorite also carries dangers. Number 2. Market-side chicken, Alfredo meals. In the summer of 2025, hospitals across the country began to see a troubling pattern. Patients were showing up with severe infections caused by Listeria monocytogenes. Within weeks, the Centers for Disease Control confirmed 17 cases across 13 states. 16 people were hospitalized. 3 of them died. The trail led back to a meal millions of Americans trusted Walmart's own market-side chicken fettuccine Alfredo. Packaged in plastic trays and sold as a ready-made dinner, it promised comfort and convenience. Instead, it delivered one of the deadliest outbreaks tied to Walmart's private label foods in years. The meals were produced by Fresh Realm, a California-based supplier that churns out prepared foods for multiple retailers. When contamination slipped through, it did not just stay in one kitchen or one town. It spread nationwide. By the time investigators identified the source, Those meals were already sitting in freezers and refrigerators across the country waiting to be eaten. Listeria is not an ordinary germ. Most bacteria die in the freezer. Listeria survives and even thrives in the cold. That means a meal can look perfectly safe on the outside while danger lurks inside. For healthy adults, it can cause days of fever, nausea, and exhaustion. But for older adults, pregnant women, and people with weaker immune systems, it can turn fatal. That is why this outbreak was so devastating. The timeline tells the real story. First came scattered hospitalizations, patients too sick to guess what made them ill. Then state health departments began to notice a Link Chicken Alfredo meal sold under the Walmart Market Side label and Kroger's Home Chef brand. As the CDC investigated, the picture grew darker. More than a dozen states were involved. The recall came too late for families already touched by tragedy. This was not just bad luck. It was a failure in a system built on scale and speed. Walmart does not make its own prepared meals. It outsources to suppliers like Fresh Realm, who run high-volume plants under constant pressure to cut costs and meet deadlines. When corners are cut, food safety is one of the first places cracks appear. And with Walmart's distribution network, one contaminated batch can scatter across the country in days. Shoppers never see that side of the process. To them, a Walmart private label meal feels like a safe bet. The market side label carries an air of quality as if it is backed by extra oversight. But the reality is far more fragile. When the very brand that bears Walmart's name turns deadly, it shatters the idea that budget convenience can always be trusted. Imagine how it feels as a customer. You buy a tray of pasta for an easy weeknight dinner. You eat it without a second thought. Weeks later, you hear on the news that the very meal you served was part of a nationwide recall tied to hospitalizations and deaths. Even if you were lucky enough not to get sick, the sense of betrayal stays. The trust in that familiar freezer aisle begins to erode. Actually, it's fair to say not every market-side meal will end in tragedy. Millions are eaten safely. But this outbreak revealed the cracks in a massive system where speed, volume, and cost take priority over safety. For families, the danger was not just theoretical. It was real, measured in lives lost. If a simple tray of pasta from Walmart's own label can hide a fatal risk, what does that say about the rest of the freezer aisle? Because the next story takes us even further from home, to food imported from halfway around the world, Walmart's frozen shrimps. Number 3, frozen shrimps. The Food and Drug Administration does not often use the word radioactive in a warning to shoppers, but that is exactly what happened in the fall of 2025. Customers were told not to eat certain lots of great value frozen shrimp sold at Walmart. Tests had flagged the presence of cesium-137, a radioactive isotope more often associated with nuclear fallout than with the seafood aisle. Unlike bacteria, radiation carries no smell, no taste, no warning sign. You cannot cook it away in a pan. You cannot rinse it off in the sink. It is invisible. That is what makes this case so unsettling. People who had already stocked their freezers had no way of knowing if their shrimp was part of the risk. The shrimp in question came from Indonesia, shipped in massive containers across the ocean before landing on American shelves. Customs and FDA screens found traces of cesium-137 in shipments tied to the supplier. The levels were not high enough to trigger immediate burns or poisoning, but that was never the concern. The real fear was chronic exposure. Low-level radiation does its harm, slowly raising the risk of cancer over years. For older Americans, the word radioactive strikes a nerve. Many grew up during the Cold War when fallout shelters and mushroom clouds were part of everyday life. To see that word tied to a bag of frozen shrimp in a Walmart freezer brings back a fear once thought buried. This is not just another recall notice, it is a reminder of how fragile trust in the food system can be. Walmart is not alone in relying on imported shrimp. The United States imports the vast majority of the shrimp it consumes, often from farms in Southeast Asia. These farms operate under different safety standards, sometimes with weaker oversight than domestic producers. Walmart buys on a massive scale, always looking for the lowest price. That pressure means relying on foreign suppliers who can deliver bulk shipments at bargain costs. But along with those bargains come risks, antibiotic residues, unsafe farming conditions, and now even radioactive contamination. The FDA warning listed multiple lot codes and best-by dates. But most shoppers never check those details. They grab a bag with the familiar blue Great Value logo and assume it is safe. By the time the advisory reached the public, bags were already sitting in freezers across at least a dozen states. Families had already planned dinners, already served the shrimp, already trusted the label. And this is where the danger feels different from bacteria. A family who undercooks meat can learn the lesson the hard way, painful as it may be. But with radioactive contamination, there is no learning curve. There is no clear moment of sickness to connect to a single meal. There is only the quiet worry that something invisible has been built in the body over time. The freezer aisle is supposed to offer comfort and convenience. But when the words radioactive contamination appear in the same sentence as Walmart's great value shrimp comfort disappears. Trust disappears. And shoppers are left asking the question no brand wants to hear what else is hiding in that freezer aisle. Because if shrimp can raise radioactive alarms, even the fruit meant to sweeten a morning smoothie may not be as safe as it looks. Number 4. Frozen fruits. Frozen fruit looks like the safest bet in the freezer. Bright berries labeled all natural, ready to drop into a smoothie. For shoppers at Walmart, it feels like the one choice in the aisle that can only be good for you. But that image collapsed when frozen strawberries sold under Walmart's great value label were linked to a nationwide hepatitis outbreak. In the spring of 2023, the FDA traced dozens of hepatitis A cases back to imported frozen strawberries. People who thought they were blending up health in a glass ended up in hospital beds with jaundice fever and liver inflammation. The recall reached Walmart and other major chains. Suddenly, what looked like a healthy start to the morning had turned into a public health investigation. Later that same year, Sunrise Growers issued another recall, this time for mixed fruit blends that included strawberries, blackberries, and mango, sold under multiple brands, Walmart's great value among them. The concern was listeria, a pathogen that thrives in cold. These recalls stretched across multiple states, proving once again that even fruit, the picture of wholesomeness, can carry hidden risks. The danger here is not like meat or pasta. When shoppers buy ground beef, they know it must be cooked. When they pick up frozen lasagna, they expect to heat it thoroughly. But frozen fruit is different. Most people eat it raw, poured straight into a blender, sprinkled on top of cereal, or thawed for dessert. There is no kill step. Viruses and bacteria go from the bag to the stomach without interruption. That is what makes frozen fruit uniquely risky. Hepatitis A in particular is not just another stomach bug. It's a virus that attacks the liver, causing weeks of fatigue, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, and in severe cases, hospitalization. For older adults, the risk is especially sharp. A younger person might recover with rest, but seniors face longer and more dangerous complications. The outbreak linked to strawberries showed how quickly that risk could spread, with cases confirmed across multiple states before the warning even reached many freezers. This betrayal cuts deep because frozen fruit is marketed as health itself. Parents buy it for their children, believing they are offering vitamins and fiber. Seniors choose it to stay on track with diets their doctors recommend. No one pictures a virus hiding in the berries. That sense of violation is different from a burger recall or a pasta tray gone bad. Fruit is supposed to be the good choice, the safe choice. That is why these recalls rattled shoppers so profoundly. Even listeria carries a unique risk in fruit. Unlike bacteria that die in freezing, listeria can survive and linger. A bag of fruit sitting quietly in a freezer for months may look safe, but the danger waits. Blending it into a smoothie does not eliminate the threat. It simply delivers it in a form that looks refreshing and harmless. Of course, not every bag of Walmart's frozen fruit is unsafe. Millions are eaten without issue. US-grown blueberries and wild Maine for example, have never been tied to hepatitis outbreaks. But when imported strawberries and fruit blends repeatedly make recall lists, the warning is clear. Shoppers cannot assume that all natural means all safe. The sad thing is, we can't stop here yet. Fruit is not even the last surprise hiding in that aisle. Number 5. Frozen waffles. In early 2024, the Food and Drug Administration announced a recall that caught families off guard. Frozen waffles, one of the most trusted staples in the breakfast aisle, were suddenly flagged for possible listeria contamination. Boxes from Treehouse Foods, a major supplier, included products sold under Walmart's own labels. What looked like a safe, kid-friendly food was now part of a national health warning. The recall covered multiple lot codes and dates. For most shoppers, those details meant little. What mattered was the shock: a toaster waffle, the very symbol of convenience, had ended up on the same federal alert list as raw beef and imported seafood. For parents and grandparents, it raised an unsettling question: if even waffles could carry a deadly pathogen, what food was safe anymore? Listeria is not just another foodborne germ. According to the CDC, it causes more hospitalizations than any other common foodborne pathogen. It thrives in cold, slipping through environments that stop other bacteria. And it preys hardest on the most vulnerable older adults, pregnant women, and children with weaker immune systems. A small bite can lead to fever muscle aches, and in severe cases, brain infection or blood poisoning. For seniors, that danger can mean weeks in the hospital or worse. The waffles were traced back to Treehouse Foods, a supplier that runs massive plants producing for multiple retail chains. This was not a single faulty box. It was a systemic crack in the way frozen foods are made and distributed. Once contamination slips into a facility at that scale, the reach is immediate and nationwide. By the time the recall notice appeared, boxes were already stacked in freezers across America. Families had already served them at the breakfast table. This is where the betrayal cuts deepest. Shoppers expect raw meat to be risky. They may even be cautious about seafood or frozen fruit. But waffles. They are the last product most families would question. Parents drop them in the toaster on school mornings without a thought. Grandparents serve them with syrup to make visits special. The entire point of a frozen waffle is its simplicity and safety. The recall shattered that illusion. And behind that betrayal is the same machine that drives much of Walmart's freezer aisle mass production under relentless cost pressure. To keep prices low, Walmart relies on giant suppliers who must deliver millions of boxes quickly and cheaply. Safety checks are in place, but speed and volume create cracks where contamination can slip through. The consumer never sees those cracks until a recall makes headlines. Not every box of waffles is dangerous. Millions are eaten without incident. But the 2024 recall was proof that no freezer food is beyond risk. The foods we assume are safest, the ones meant for children's plates, can still fail. It is a reminder that the gap between perception and reality in the freezer aisle is wider than most shoppers realize. Picture the scene in reverse. A child grabs a waffle before school. A grandparent butters one for breakfast. Hours later, the news reports that waffles just like those are being pulled from shelves for listeria. Even if the family was not harmed, the trust is gone. Breakfast will never feel quite the same. We have walked through 5 foods in Walmart's freezer that carry risks: burgers with foreign objects, pasta trays tied to deadly outbreaks, shrimp flagged for radioactivity fruit that spread hepatitis, and even waffles meant for kids. It is enough to make anyone look at that frozen aisle with suspicion. But here is the truth. Not every frozen food is a ticking time bomb. Some still hold up under scrutiny. Some have records of safety that stretch back decades. And for families who still need the savings and convenience Walmart offers, knowing the difference matters. That is why we are not stopping with warnings. We are ending with guidance. 2 frozen foods you can still trust. 2 choices that do not just avoid danger, but actually deliver on the promise of safety and value. Let's start with the first: berries. Number 1. U.S. Grown frozen berries. In 2023, shoppers who blended frozen strawberries into smoothies ended up in hospital beds. The FDA traced a hepatitis A outbreak to imported berries from Baja California, Mexico. Walmart's own Great Value line was among those pulled from shelves. A bag of fruit that promised health and convenience had carried a virus that attacks the liver. But here is the contrast most shoppers do not know. In more than 3 decades, not a single hepatitis outbreak has been tied to berries grown and frozen in the United States. The FDA itself said so in a strategy report released in 2025. For 35 years, domestic berries have kept a clean record, while imported fruit has triggered repeated recalls. That difference is not an accident. U.S.-grown berries operate under tighter farming standards and stronger oversight. They are frozen quickly after harvest, often within hours of leaving the field. The chain of custody is short and transparent. And if something does go wrong, federal inspectors can intervene faster because the farms are here at home. Imported berries, by contrast, pass through longer supply lines, often with weaker safety nets. By the time they reach Walmart's freezer, shoppers have no way to see where they came from or what risks traveled with them. This matters because frozen fruit is one of the few foods people eat straight from the bag. There is no cooking step to kill pathogens. Tossed into a smoothie or sprinkled on cereal, the berries go from freezer to mouth in seconds. That makes the safety record of domestic fruit even more impressive, and the outbreaks tied to imports even more concerning. For consumers, the choice comes down to a simple label check. On the back of every frozen berry bag is a country of origin statement. It takes only seconds to read, but most shoppers never look. If it says product of USA, that is your safest bet. If it lists Mexico, Chile, or a blend of countries, the risk climbs. Take wild blueberries as an example. Harvested in Maine, they are frozen at peak ripeness and shipped across the country. In decades of records, they have never been linked to a hepatitis outbreak. They may cost a bit more, but for families who want peace of mind, they are a trusted pick in Walmart's freezer. To be fair, not every imported berry is contaminated. Millions are consumed safely every year, but the pattern is clear. Outbreak after outbreak is traced back to imported fruit, never to US-grown crops. The numbers tell the story. One side of the freezer carries risk, the other has decades of safety. This is not just about statistics, it is about trust. Parents buy frozen fruit believing they are making the healthiest choice. Seniors add it to their oatmeal because doctors recommend fiber and antioxidants. That trust deserves to be protected. And in the case of US-grown berries, it has been for decades. The lesson is simple: do not assume every bag is the same. Look for product of USA. That tiny phrase is a safety net printed right on the package. It is the difference between risking a liver infection and enjoying a smoothie without worry. In a freezer aisle filled with recalls and warnings, this is one food that still carries a clear record of safety. If you want the healthiest start to the day, US-grown frozen berries remain one of the best bets you can make. Because not every choice in Walmart's freezer is a gamble. Some still come with peace of mind. And in this aisle, that peace of mind is spelled out right on the label. Number 2. Wild-caught Alaska salmon. To end this video, nothing is better than salmon, one of the most rooted foods in our American memory. Let's spend a second to feel. The pink flesh laid across hot grates, the squeeze of lemon, the smell of smoke drifting into the evening. For many families, it is a food that signals both celebration and health. In an aisle filled with frozen shortcuts, wild Alaska salmon still carries that tradition forward. Unlike so many other foods in Walmart's freezer, salmon stands out, not for recalls or outbreaks, but for its safety record. The FDA and EPA place salmon in the lower mercury category, meaning it is safe to eat regularly. That matters deeply for older adults who need the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids without the burden of heavy metals. In fact, salmon is one of the few fish that nutritionists across the board recommend as both safe and nourishing. Part of that assurance comes from where it is caught. Alaska's waters are among the most carefully managed fisheries in the world. State law actually requires that fish populations be sustained for future generations. That means strict quotas, constant monitoring, and a culture of stewardship that stretches back decades. When a package says wild-caught Alaska, it reflects not just geography, but an entire system of oversight built to protect both the fish and the people who eat them. Another layer of confidence comes from certification. Many of the frozen salmon products in Walmart's aisles carry the blue check mark of the Marine Stewardship Council, a sign that the fishery meets global standards for sustainability and traceability. That blue label is a quick shortcut for shoppers who want proof that the salmon they are buying has been audited and approved. This is not just about sustainability, it is about safety. Wild Alaska salmon is harvested in cold, clean waters with strict limits on contaminants. Testing shows that both farmed and wild salmon are generally low in mercury, but wild Alaska stocks consistently remain among the cleanest. For families trying to make a safe choice, that difference matters. Of course, not all salmon in Walmart's freezer tells the same story. Some bags are vague, labeled only as salmon fillets without a clear catch area. Others may come from overseas farms where antibiotics and overcrowding raise new concerns. That is why shoppers must turn the bag over and look for those keywords wild caught and product of Alaska. When paired with the MSC blue check, it is the closest thing to a guarantee the freezer aisle can offer. Imagine the difference. A family that once worried about hepatitis in berries or listeria in waffles can find confidence in a food that has stood the test of time. For seniors, it is more than comfort. It is a source of protein and nutrients that supports health without hidden risks. For parents, it is a way to serve fish without fearing what might be inside. To be fair, farmed salmon is not automatically dangerous. Millions of servings are eaten safely every year. But the uneven quality and global sourcing make it less predictable. Wild Alaska salmon, by contrast, comes from a specific place with a proven record. It is not a gamble, it is a tradition. In a freezer aisle filled with foods that have betrayed trust, wild Alaska salmon remains one of the rare safe bets. It is a product that connects modern shoppers to older traditions of clean water, responsible harvest, and safe meals. After all, food is more than fuel. It is memory, family, trust. When we open the freezer door, we are not just buying dinner, we are trusting a system to protect the people we love. Too often, that trust has been broken. Recalls and outbreaks remind us that behind shiny packaging corners can be cut and risks can spread far. But knowledge changes the equation. When we learn to read a label to know the difference between an import and a domestic harvest, we are no longer passive shoppers. We are guardians of our own tables. Yes, Walmart's freezer aisle is crowded with shortcuts. Yet hidden within are choices shaped by care, not compromise, like US-grown berries and wild Alaska salmon. They prove that safety and tradition can survive even in a market built on speed. Because in the end, protecting health is not just about avoiding danger, it is about choosing wisely and keeping trust where it belongs.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.